Hello, everyone. Really happy to be here. It's great to finally see one event about creative coding to sort of show and explain how broad the range of what we do can be and all the different applications we can have. It's gonna be a weird start, so bear with me. Slightly experimental talk, I guess. So anyway, so my name is Johanny Lemercier. Let's see if this starts. Very experimental, actually. I'm a Flash developer. Hey. And it's actually 2004. And I just made a little CV to show you what I do. This is really weird. It's been offline for about 10 years, and I found it yesterday.
Hello. My name is Joni. I'm a French developer, and I just moved in Bristol 3 months ago.
In my memory, this was much better.
I've been working in France for 3 years, and during this time, I had the opportunity of using my programming and graphic designer skills for well-known fashion companies like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, and Paco Rabanne.
I was more of an intern.
This year, I've been working for the French
streetwear
streetwear label Krusty Bunch as webmaster and communication manager. Further to these enriching experiences, I wanted to give a new dimension to my course by working in England.
It gets better in a minute.
I am deeply interested by arts, the internet, movies, gaming, and I am in touch with the street. That's why I can give another dimension to my work, being very up-to-date on the latest fashion in design and technology.
Very up-to-date.
For you, I could become Spider-Man,
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
as well as Shrek.
So the sound is really bad because I had to compress
My
the
best
speed.
wish today is to work for a dynamic company on ambitious projects and making an active contribution to the evolution of your company,
Of
pushing
course.
away the limits of Flash with creative ideas.
I'm going to stop there because it's a little long. And thank you. So I'm a Flash developer. As you can see, I just moved to Bristol, and I work as a freelancer. And I'm really glad those years, around 2004, freelancer work is really well paid in the UK. If you can convince people with a short movie, they won't really ask you for your diploma, which is great because I don't have my baccalaureate even. So I'm really glad this helped me to sort of skip the diploma part. So I was, quite well paid as a freelancer. I could pay my rent in a single day of work. So it gave me a lot of free time. And I used that free time to do VJing. I bought a very small projector on eBay, really crappy. And I would take it with me in my backpack every weekend with really long video cables. And I would set up my projector behind the DJ and sort of improvise projection and stuff. I did that for about 3 years. I did many gigs. It was really amazing on the weekends or holidays to just go on a little tour and visit the British festivals. I did a lot of different content. I was a lot into sampling, so basically taking other people's work and like recreating something new, like DJs do. So that's what VJing is about. I had a lot of very silly content. Really weird stuff. That was the sort of gems I was trying to find on the internet. Things that I would play alongside techno or breakbeat or drum and bass. And I guess the funny thing about doing VJing compared to my developer work is that finally I could actually show my work to an audience. I had a projection behind me, I could see the audience in front of me, and I could see people smile and people sort of react to it. And I guess that's what I was missing when I was working on my computer, because I was doing a lot of ActionScript and PHP and MySQL and HTML, but I would always deliver something to a client or to an FTP, and then I would never really have any interaction with the audience, with the public. So that's why VJing, I think, for me was kind of special, because the work I would do during the week, every weekend I would show the new clips I found, and I was doing some kind of real-time video editing. And I was also doing a lot of experiments with technology, like many people. I used the Wiimote with this weird software, so you could get the Wiimote signals as a MIDI signal, and you could then, in a VJing software, you could control the speed of your clip, or like sort of add effects and stuff. So this was quite nice, actually, to bring some Swift files into Archaos at the time, and I could use the Wiimote to sort of control stuff in real time. That was really a lot of fun. We did a lot of projection outside and sort of improvised some projection on plastic sculptures, and it was a lot of experimentation. We also started a night with a bunch of friends. We were really into electronic music and visuals, so we started this night called Cuisine. For the very first edition, we managed to get Fids and Uffy in town, and we had a lot of projections, and it was really exciting. And every month, we would do a different flyer. So I sort of used my graphic design skills to. We were a team of 7 of us working on these flyers every month, and the idea was to bring food, like music as food, or something you can consume, and culture as something that we can share. This is the Christmas one, very Christmassy and nice. We had a lot of fun just finding new ideas every month. We wanted like a main color and an actor, and then some sort of food and these compositions. We really had a lot of fun. I'm sorry for Zach, who we sort of threw tomatoes at him for a couple of hours. So we did this for about a year and a half. I think we did sort of 12 editions. It was really intense because in Bristol the music scene is really dense. So you have to do a lot of. The worst part is to for like 2 weeks be outside and like pasting and gluing posters every night because they get recovered by the other party and stuff. So it was really exhausting, but I was in charge of the visuals, so I would do VJing myself, but I would also invite other artists, other friends from France and from Europe to perform at the events. One of the famous, one of my favorite poster was this one. I sort of played with this sort of anamorphic illusion. The bowl and flour and eggs you can see on the left are not actually there. It's just a projection. It's just light. And I started doing a lot of experiments of like just taking a picture and then reprojecting the picture into a plate and see how realistic this could be. And then I sort of realized years later, a sort of philosophical approach was that maybe reality as we know it is mostly light. What we see around us, what we perceive, it's mostly light emitted by light sources or bouncing off things and shapes. So this is how we perceive reality, I guess. And with a projector, you can control the light. You can control the light so precisely that actually you might be able to change reality, to sort of transform what you can see. And this picture is interesting. It's just an empty plate with light, and this is what you see from the side. So it's only single point. It only works from a specific point. But it was my first discovery, and I realized I wanted to be a magician or do more of this work on the side as being a developer. Then I started doing a lot of experiments mostly in my bedroom. This is me with an origami and a video projector that is off-site. And I realized that I could, if I put flash full screen on the projector, then I can see my mouse being projected, and then I can trace things. I could basically draw on objects. And then I could put an ID for each shape, each element, and then with ActionScript, I could sort of animate them in like a couple of minutes. And this was just amazing. Just this, you can actually make the paper looks like it's emitting light. So I started being really obsessed about projecting outside a screen, not just on a rectangular flat plane, but actually I realized I could project onto paper. With a bit of time, I could do more complex compositions, and then I could sort of use masking to move my mouse around and make this sort of interactive mapping where Yeah, it's quite obvious. I won't explain what interactive is to you, I guess. But so yeah, ActionScript, one projector, amazing, just magic. So then I started really seriously considering doing this on a daily basis, and I started doing a lot of workshops where I would go to schools and actually teach, doing always the same pyramid with paper, not really creative in terms of shapes. But I did a lot of workshops, and then I started presenting my work in festivals. This was with Visomat in Berlin at Club Transmedial. And I started exploring a lot of various shapes, always using Flash full screen. This is actually the view of the video projector, and I slowly trace each of the edges. And up to this day, I think Flash is still the best tool if you want to do really precise mapping. If we're talking about a single 1 pixel line that you move around an object or that you want to map on something, you want to work with vectors, obviously, to be able to select shapes and stuff. Like, it's a shame Flash doesn't really exist anymore, but it's still the best thing, in my opinion. And then once you made your shapes, then you sort of have control with light over your canvas. So what you're projecting on, you can completely change how it looks, its texture. You could do a lot of funny things. Then I started realizing that also doing like lines and flat shapes was interesting, but also I could experiment a little bit depth. So then I discovered Cinema 4D, and I started modeling my canvases. In this case, it's sort of anti-mapping, because I did a 3D model in Cinema 4D first. I did a bunch of animations, the one you can see on the right side. And then, so the camera, you have to make sure the camera doesn't move, otherwise the mapping, it no longer works. But then I projected my image, and then I retraced, you can see it on the left side. And then I redraw my shape with paint, and then it turns your painting into something sort of interesting in terms of perception. So I wasn't the only one interested in perception and illusion and using projection, not on a screen, but on anything else. And I started this label called AntiVJ with a bunch of friends. This is us posing at the Mapping Festival in Geneva. I think it was our first installation together. Yeah, it's a bit weird, the posing. But yeah, we started trying a lot of different scales, a lot of different shapes, always working within minimalism and sort of simple elements, because it's the easiest with projection mapping, really. Then we realized we could apply these techniques and these ideas to any scale. We could actually use a building itself as a canvas for projection. And once you sort of master the sort of calibration technique and the perspective and everything in your bedroom, then you take the same computer outside with a bigger projector, and you can explore. We were sort of turning the architecture into a show, into a spectacle. So at the beginning, we did a lot of sort of obvious wow effects, like that everyone also did, like you make everything explode, and then it breaks, and it opens. And so it was sort of the beginning. We were not really sure what all this was about, but it was a lot of fun. We also realized that we could turn a really ugly building, like La Mairie de Enghien-les-Bains, which is just a few miles away from here. It looks like, look at the little trees on the bottom. It's really, really bad. And then with just with a video projector, you can then turn this into a fantastical, magical clockwork thing. So yeah, there's definitely a sense of magic that we really loved with this new medium, with this new format. The software you use or the tools you use, they don't really matter. You can actually do these now with anything, you name it, like Unity or Blender, or there's no... The end result is pretty much the same now. It doesn't really matter. Then we started traveling a lot to a lot of different places. We went to this amazing city, New Songdo, which was one of the first smart cities at the time. It completely failed, by the way. I went back last year, and there's no one there. It's empty, and so smart city, don't do it. It's not a good idea. the idea there was to have everything sort of controlled by computers. With you could access everything everywhere with RFIDs and face scan, and it was all sort of optimized in terms of it was supposed to be. So everything was controlled by computers, and yeah, it just didn't quite work at the end. But as artists, we wanted to do the projection to be about this idea of Big Brother, the idea of the architecture being controlled almost by a machine as well. And we also started questioning, so what happens if there's a bug in this machine? What happens if the network goes down and then you can't even go back to your home, to your flat, because the technology is not reliable? So I guess it was one of the first time that the canvas was exciting enough, so we spent a lot of time storyboarding and like asking ourselves, what should we tell about this city? What should we bring? Not just flashy explosions, but we started doing some research about the history of things. I have a lot of those, so I should probably scroll a little bit. Also, when we started doing castles and cathedrals, then you ask yourself even twice or three times, like, is what I do relevant? What does it mean? Am I allowed to sort of break the architecture just because it looks cool, or should I sort of think about the deeper implication? So yeah, a lot of interesting questions raised, and I think that's when we started being more artists and a little less just entertainers doing cool, flashy things. I was still doing the mapping with Flash, as you can see. Like, it's a time-consuming process, but you get like really perfect, everything perfectly lined up, and it's always a nice process. Also, to be in a cathedral at night. I remember this one in Breda in 2009. That was just before Christmas, I think. The show was actually a little later, but I came by myself and I was alone for an entire night until 2 a.m. Was just the projector calibration was really late, so I started the mapping after 2, and then I spent most of the night just tracing the architecture. So then it sort of gives you a really special connection with this organ, and later I found out that the organ has been was dismantled twice. So the story of the city itself of Breda was actually very interesting and rich. I'm going to really skip through. That was about 10 years of work. We also did a bit of stage design with NTVJ. This was for Nuit Sonore. So it was more like creating... so basically nowadays, like having a DJ behind a laptop doing stuff, it's not really visually entertaining anymore. You don't even know what's going on, what the person is doing. So festivals need some visual element. That's why, and also VJing is could be a little bit boring sometimes. So they want structures, and it's a really good opportunity to work with architects or stage designers. So working within the music festivals was really interesting. We did this stage design for Flying Lotus years ago, and it was a combination of a print at the back that was sort of projection mapped. And then we were using sometimes this print as a screen, but sometimes with projection mapping. I'm going to have a couple of those things during the talk. It's just some credits to amazing coders, creative coders. This one, there's actually no picture of him on the internet. Is a bit of a ghost, but he was in St. Petersburg and is now in Moscow working for NVIDIA in the R&D for the GPUs. And he's amazing. Like, he did all this back 7 years ago. He was Ray Marching. He's from the demo scene. And this clip, this intro is so good that I think Flying Lotus kept it for every show over the past 7 years. Every opening, I think, of his show is still the work of Unk. So there will be a few of them. I might stop and tell a little bit of backstory, because these developers are much better than I am. I'm not really good at shaders and stuff. Another format, so not architecture or stage design, but installations. That's what we tend to do a lot in festivals. Juliette, that you can see on this picture, was explaining a little bit of the backstory of this project Blueprint. So instead of taking a facade of a building and changing your content or creating content so it matches, in this case, I had to create my own canvas. And I wanted to explore architecture and geometry. So the screens themselves had to have this kind of 3D presence or some sort of physicality. So that's why we chose these 4 monoliths that you can see at the back. It's a bit confusing. If you're in front of it or inside or on the side, you will see something completely different. And I think that was the idea of this installation, was also to give different perspective on the visuals and projections. Another iteration of Blueprint, Juliette was explaining how important it is for us to be able to develop a project through different venues and different formats. And she mentioned the projector hack. It's so important for us, for many projects. So if you have a DLP projector, crack it open, unscrew the color wheel, smash it, put it back, and then your projector is twice brighter. And also you have 3 times the frame rate. So you can actually produce yourself fairly medium or big installation with this trick. It's being underused, and you should really all crack open your projectors and do this. This is Elliot Woods. He found this trick, and we did a bunch of workshops together, trying to spread the hacking love. And so I keep the legacy, and he does also. But yeah, please hack your projector and do installations, like large installation on a budget. That was a little aparté. So yeah, my life is always around the computer. It's and probably a lot of your lives as well, also within that framework or that area. And sometimes it gets really extreme. We were invited, Elliot Woods actually invited myself and Kyle and a bunch of other artists to Manchester, to Salford University. And we did this residency inside what's called the Cave. It has 8 projectors, projections everywhere. It's stereo projections, so you can see in 3D with the glasses. There's like active tracking everywhere, so you can track the whole body at a high frequency. When there's a crash, it looks really terrible. Everything turns blue, and it feels like the end of the world. And then you spend endless nights just... you can't really put a table in there, because when you take that in and out, it could scratch the really expensive flooring. So most of the time, we were like coding on the floor with an extension. Yeah, it was weird. But then the result was very interesting. Remember, that was maybe like 6-7 years ago, and you could really have this sense of immersion, and you sort of have this real-time anamorphosis that was really inspiring for me. You remember the projection of the fruits in the plates. It's only from a single point of view. And seeing this technology, I realized that you could do something interactive with head tracking and then correct the perspective. So that's... but you need this £1 million equipment to achieve it at the time. But it really inspired me for the end of this presentation. So living in this world is interesting, but it can get a little exhausting, and sometimes it's not very pleasant. So I try to balance my time around the computer, around the screen, and around all this with a bit of nature as much as I can. I always sort of liked nature, and I was raised in the countryside, and I liked forest and stuff, but it wasn't really something that appealed to me so much until I felt really trapped inside the computer and code and stuff. And I realized that actually I should actively try to be more in nature and to discover more landscapes and find a balance that way. So I started also collecting a lot of pictures from the plane seats. I would always get the window seats so I could take pictures and do this collection. That wasn't even a project at the time, but just a nice thing. I had this fascination for these rocks and landscapes. Always deserts with no life and something pretty arid and dry. So yeah, and I think for every festival I would go, I would check if there was a national park nearby, and I would take a day off or 2 days off to do a bit of hiking and go discover these places. And that really helped me. I think otherwise I would probably have been a bit burned out of just spending all my life in basements, in dark theaters, and in music festivals. That's not a really healthy lifestyle to have. So doing these nature trips really were really inspiring. I started getting a bit organized. So I would take some a map and a bottle of water and a couple of cameras and some batteries and sun cream. So I felt like I was sort of getting a little more professional in the way I could sort of travel and safe as well. But actually, I under-considerated the amount of water I should take. I had a lot of fireworks, but actually now I take a lot more water because it's kind of dangerous. This was the Death Valley National Park, and it goes up to 45 degrees when I was there. Also, I did this beautiful trip in Brazil, and I did a 2 hours hike in the jungle, and it was all really beautiful. And when I reached the top point, I guess, of the hike, the end of the hike, there was this really beautiful view with fog in the distance and something really sort of romantic and really beautiful. So I started taking long exposure pictures, and then I realized the fog was creating this nice distant shape. And then it was nighttime, and I had 2 hours to go back to the car, and I was in real trouble. So then I realized maybe I should consider this as I should be a little safer. So now, I guess, thanks to Juliette also, we organize things much better. I have 2 GPS, so if one fails, I'm not completely lost. It's a bit weird. I feel like I'm showing my holiday pictures a bit, so I'm going to skip through. You'll see the connection in a while. This is the Mount Fuji. And I guess when you get to these extreme landscapes, where you can see here the shadow actually goes about 200 kilometers from the bottom of Fuji in the direction of Tokyo. So something really happens, and you can't really put words on what you're feeling and what you're seeing. It's so grand, it's so big and impressive that it's very hard to try to sort of communicate this. I'm struggling right now to try to explain how amazing. So I started doing a bit of research on that feeling you get when you're in front of such landscapes, and also started reading a bit of Spinoza. And I won't get into details, but I like the idea for Spinoza that maybe there's not a God in the universe, in a class or doing stuff, but maybe the universe itself, maybe the cosmos, so that includes everyone and the mountains and the sea, everyone. Maybe this whole thing could be a sort of a spiritual element. I'm not sure if I believe this, but I found this really inspiring because when I'm speechless on the top of a volcano, there's something I'm looking for, and maybe Spinoza has some answers, who knows. So I carried on doing these collections. And then I was like, oh, I should really try to do a project around this. I like architecture, geometry and stuff, but nature seems to be the most sort of profound, the strongest thing that inspires me right now. So I did some research about how could I capture nature? How could I represent what I feel and what I experience? So I went deeper into the work of Caspar David Friedrich, this romantic painter from the 18th century. And I rediscovered some of his less-known paintings of these landscapes. And I think what it's trying to capture here may be a little bit similar to the emotions I've encountered. And I then discovered the idea of the sublime, which is the word that sort of that means all what I was struggling to explain. The struggle is when something is greater than you and something you can't really explain. It's beyond all possibilities of calculation, measurement, or imitation. And obviously the most famous painting that sort of captures the sublime is the Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog from Caspar David Friedrich. So after witnessing this attempt of capturing the sublime, I had my own go at capturing these feelings. The first attempt was on the top of a volcano. I bought this small rig of GoPros. That was a while ago. Now it's much easier, but that's how I did it. I bought this 3D printed rig that would put all the cameras together. And then I started doing a lot of captures of... I saw that with 360, maybe I could capture more of just a little frame, a little something. Because when I'm in front of these landscapes, it feels so immense, so huge, that I thought the sort of immersive aspect of the 360 would sort of help to capture the scale of these places. So I would take it with me all the time in the forest. And then the stitched image would look like this. And I also experimented with point clouds, with like LiDAR scans of a forest. And then I worked on this piece in 2015 inside a dome to try to communicate that sense of grandeur. I had another go. So the dome is interesting, but it wasn't really capturing what I was trying to. It was just nice and immersive, and so I thought I had to do something else, to try something else. So then I went into generative landscapes. You all know noises, so these functions that help you to generate textures. So I had a lot of goes with different types of noises. Actually, this is another little credit for Simon Gelfus. His name disappeared, but yeah, Simon Gelfus, who taught me everything about noises, about how you can control the functions and tweak them to make your function look like the sea or the dunes. So I started doing a lot of. It's nothing really new. Everyone sort of does that, and every video game has a sort of noise engine to do elevations. But my fascination was that with a single function, you could actually create such a variety of sort of realistic thing. You can create a dune, and then if you animate one value of your function, the dune becomes this sort of weird ocean. And by extension, you could almost guess, or maybe there's a single function that sort of rules the universe. Maybe there's probably a long one, pretty complex, but what if there was this function that helps you to recreate the universe, and then you could predict everything because it's all in a function. I don't think so, but I like the idea. So generative landscapes. What if one function could help you to recreate the universe? I don't think so, but maybe. So I started sort of curating noise functions. I used a lot of, what function was it? Can't remember now. I used so many. It's not a Perlin noise, it's sort of an advanced Perlin noise, but then I would do a bit of a threshold and blending of different noises. And then by playing these, with these blends, you can then create a valley or like volcanoes or rocks. So I spent a lot of time sort of tweaking these functions and curating this selection of pieces. This collection is called Landforms. I did actually an edition of 1,000, and they're all unique. They're all completely different, and they all depend of the same single function. To make this sort of nice effect of gradient, there's no gray. It's only black points. So I used weighted Voronoi to create this sort of pointillism effect that is sort of balanced. So there's no sort of packs of bad dots. They're all sort of evenly distributed. There's a really nice software, actually, not the one I used, but there's an open source software called SteepleGen from Mad Evil Scientist that you can actually use, and it creates these really beautiful clusters of 2D dots. So I played with those for a long, long time. Then I did a series of laser cut paper on a light box. So the dots you actually see are void. It's just light going through the black paper. So I sort of like playing with the sort of negative shape. Okay, so it was interesting, but that was sort of really flat, and there was no sense of grandeur or sense of scale. So I tried another technique with CGI landscape, hashtag Octane, because it really sort of changed the way we can do 3D rendering with GPU and based render. So I had to go with this generative landscape and also playing a lot with the lighting. This was, Juliette mentioned the commercial projects. That's one of the few we did. Barco, the projector manufacturer, is actually based in Belgium, and we are sort of neighbors because our studio is in Belgium. And they helped us to sort of develop, to buy a render farm and to develop these really huge structures and landscape that I was exploring with CGI. So this is all generative. There's no texture or no picture being used there. It's only noise, very, very well curated noises. Comment? Ah oui, j'ai pas mis. So Philippe Audas is a great developer and an Octane modeler, and I forgot to put a little sticker, but hi Philippe. Is like amazingly talented, and it really helped us to put those together. He's a specialist of the CGI landscapes. So we used World Machine to create the topography, and then we used Octane to sort of bring the light and the fog and the sort of colors and textures. And at the end, I feel like I was getting closer, because what you see on the left is the picture from the plane that I had before, and the one on the right, it's really terrible resolution here. But this is CGI, and in a better resolution, you can't quite tell exactly which one is real. So I thought I was getting closer to these sort of realistic functions to recreate the universe. I started doing a lot of short experiments of short GIFs when I have this sort of realistic thing, and then it becomes wireframe, and then you realize it's just a simulation. I also started playing with ocean and water. That's something I want to develop further. But I found it crazy how with very, very simple code, you can actually recreate the universe. This is a picture from Anders Hoff. It's actually a holiday pictures that he tweeted, and then I started doing the same thing, but with Octane, and we sort of had this small short collaboration of like sending each other 3D render and real images. So that was interesting, but I wasn't quite there. I wasn't fully experiencing the sublime through my work. It was just okay looking or interesting. So then I started doing a lot of sketches. I thought that maybe the computers are too much of computers, and I should use more like emotional things and my hands and drawings to do things. So I started during every one of my hikes. I would always try to represent or like to capture the hike or the thing I've seen on paper, and I would always start on just with a pen and long lines. But then I realized that this is not really precise and beautiful, so then I used a plotter to make perfectly parallel and perfectly aligned. So the idea comes from me completely. There's no sort of plugin or software involved to find the idea. But when I captured the idea, then I used tools to make it happen. And I started this very long series of plotter drawings. I made maybe 300 of them now, of small formats, and now I'm making much larger formats, hoping that with a larger piece of paper I can capture better the large landscapes. But this really helped me to understand these topographies and what fascinates me in these landscapes. So I don't think it's the color that really touches me. It's really more like the shape and how the forces of the universe are actually turned into shapes. When tectonic plaques push each other, they create mountains, and when you see a mountain, you're actually witnessing the forces of the universe pushing and creating an emerging form. And those really helped me to understand this. Also, the plotter drawings is really long and really slow, so it takes hours and hours, and I like looking at the paper and the pen drawing. And there's a sense of timing, I think, of this very slow drawing that sort of matches the hikes. I think an instant print wouldn't make sense to me. I like seeing the long realization of the drawing. To sort of optimize the speed a little bit, because some of my early drawings would take 3 or 4 days to make. I use actually a lot SVG sorter from Anders Hoff in Convergent. He's been mentioned in many talks today. And actually, the way he optimizes the path really changes the final drawing as well, because when the ink when the pen runs out of ink, some drawings remain incomplete. And a lot of these shapes and patterns are actually the result of Anders' code, who's sort of a collaborator. He released the code, so I think the code he made is sort of a collaborator. I think this drawing, if he didn't go through Anders' Python script, would look completely different. So I like how the algorithm is sort of a collaborator in the process. So I keep doing plotter drawings on a daily basis almost, and I think I'm going to probably carry on for a few more years. I just can't stop doing these drawings. Another format I like to explore is larger installations. And I was very much inspired by Sol LeWitt, that also was mentioned a bunch of times today. I think Matt Delaurier explained how Sol LeWitt's process sort of inspired him as well. So we started this series of wall drawings. So it's the same technique that I was showing at the beginning. You do a drawing with a pen on the wall, and then you use video projection to animate your drawing and to turn your canvas into something bring a bit of life and motion. I started exploring a little bit more as well with anamorphosis, and how with optical illusions you can sort of create a shape that actually isn't there. So you can actually start manipulating reality in a way that this person had to get really close and sort of move around, and sometimes people have to sort of touch the wall to sort of understand what's going on. So I'm going to skip through a lot of projects that are about nature and about my trip on Mount Fuji. This is a recent project also exploring landscapes. Juliette, my super producer, was in charge of the gluing of this huge wallpaper. So I think we're going to do more of these wallpapers in the future. So if there was no wallpaper or no drawing, you would just see a projection, and you would know it's just a regular projection, like a screen. But as soon as you have ink and something darker and a physical element on the wall, then you know it's not a projection, it's a drawing, it's something else. And then the light augments your drawing. So it's funny how such a small intervention of just putting a bit of ink or paper can really change the visual perception. So yeah, one thing I realized after doing all these experiments about nature is that actually it's actually beyond possibilities of imitation. So the more I try to represent nature, the more I struggle to sort of capture this sublime. So I'm going to keep trying, but I know I'm never going to be able to do so much. So I'm actively doing more hikes. This was back in May, last May, and I was a bit burned out, and I took a month off with a plotter drawing and a little drone. I really recommend the AxiDraw that you will see in a second. And I spent these 4 weeks traveling from one location to the next. I was mostly in Utah, Nevada, and Arizona, where there is so much sublime there. There's so many amazing landscapes, very different. This is a really unexplored area south of Hanksville. And I had some solar panels to collect the light during the day, and then to be able to run the plotter and the drones. I think this is the beginning of a new series of projects where I use photogrammetry to capture these landscapes in details. And I really want to go to unexplored areas. There are not so many, but I think that over the next years, I'm going to try to do more of these exploration. This place is amazing. It's near the Roden Crater in Arizona. I also went to the Roden Crater to try to see James Turrell's project, but actually it's not ready yet, so I'll have to go back later. And this is a drawing of the topography of the Roden Crater. Yeah, I don't really want to see myself on the screen, so I'm going to skip quickly to my last point, I guess, gallery works. I'm going to sort of skip through real quick. But for me, there's a huge potential in trying to turn our works, our experiments, our research in distance field, how computers understand the reality, how computers and technology is affecting our daily lives and the future. So I do a lot of these pieces, are like drawings or prints with projection, and I explore order to chaos and how you can use light to change the perception of reality. This one is a funny one. It's the first mapping without a video projector. It's the first of my pieces without a video projector. It's actually an LCD screen that I sort of dismantled and I printed on the LCD panel and put it back together. So the light you see comes from behind the drawing, actually. So yeah, I love doing a lot of experiments with physical materials. Juliette explained how difficult it is to take a 3D model, a mesh from a computer, and bring it to reality. You can 3D print, but it's sort of limited in terms of quality. So I started this collaboration with my mom to do ceramics. We did a residency in Japan with a master glass craftsman. So we did projection on, we sort of connected light and glass and projection together. And we also used gold leaf, which is a weird but interesting material to play with. I also explored the traditional Japanese patterns. This one is called Kiko, I think, which means turtle shell. Hi, Kiko, if you're in the room. I didn't realize. This is a different project, slightly bigger, but it was done through my gallery and with Juliette and with a team of people. And this was a series of sculptures exploring the infinitely small and the quartz and atom. This piece is called Quartz. This is Kai McDonald, who did an amazing job on bringing this 3D mesh into reality with 20 layers of CNC'd polystyrene and then mirrors. Long story, we could do a talk only on this project. This is Atom with Boris. Juliette already explained a lot about it. This is Boris. He's also the maker of MadMapper and Modulate, and he made the mapping festival happen. And this is another collaborator. This was actually a commission by Barneys with Jay-Z. So he sort of provided some music and was part of the thing. So he's not really a developer, but I thought it was funny to put him here. I now try as well to bring my projection work and projection mapping into the sort of the art world. I was lucky enough to show some pieces at Art Basel in Miami 3 years ago. And at the same time, I was also part of this large projection, and I did a piece inspired by Vasarely. Yeah, I'm just obsessed by patterns. I have to put them everywhere. Last but not least, the things we are up to right now. We just moved to a new studio in Brussels a couple of years ago, and this is a big change for me, a big change for us. Because before I was mostly living in hotel rooms and airplanes. All the previous projects you saw were mostly done in a row. I was with no proper home for about 3 years. I was just going from one place to the next. So I accumulated a lot of ideas. I wanted to do projection with lasers. I wanted to do projection on water screens. but you can't bring a water screen in an hotel room. So I was a bit stuck, and I started this long, long, long list of ideas and wishes. And it's only been 2 years since I can start making some of those experiments and things. So I want to work with casting. So I always make a 3D model, a 3D mesh, often in VVVV or in Cinema 4D. Then I use an amazing software called Pepakura that sort of flattens your mesh to a piece of paper, and then you just cut and glue, and you get those shapes, and then you can mold. You can use them as mold, and you can do a lot of things. So I think over the next few years, I want to play more with wood, with resin, and with, I guess, with the code, I sort of miss physical things, physical objects. So that would bring a sort of balance as well to make objects. I wanted to work with lasers also, but they're so dangerous. But we got commissioned to do a projection in this amazing place in underneath Gare du Midi. So it's a 6-watt laser. If the beam gets into your eyes for a 50th of a second, you can get blind. So it's a tough one. But this 100-meter long tunnel was the perfect canvas to sort of experiment and understand how the quality of the light of the laser can be interesting for projects. And then we recently did our first sort of projection mapping with a laser. But there's no pixel, so it's really complicated. You can only send out vectors. And the only software that do lasers, they were made in the 90s, and they're really, really bad, and there's no timeline. You have mostly like clip arts of dancing figures or Santa. So it's really bad. So we had to develop this whole thing between VVVV. I haven't talked much about this, but this is an amazing software with a 3D engine, and you can do anything you can think of with it. So I did all the generative content in V4, and then all this was streamed into another software called made by Seb Lee. He's a specialist of lasers. He's a really interesting artist who's been working a lot with all consoles and hacking devices. So we're actually streaming SVG content and vectors to his software. And then I sort of did this mapping manually from old sketches. And then, believe it or not, the best tool to use vectors on a timeline was Flash. Even Animate CC doesn't really do the job because you can't load SVG sequences or something. So it was really weird to try to find a torrent of like Flash 5. These days, it's getting really rare. But it works. That's actually the only tool we could find to compile all the SVGs we had into layers and synchronize them to the music. So yeah, I'd really recommend Flash 5 if you have any projects. This is the result. This is still quite experimental. As you may know, the laser can only project a single dot, a single point. And if you want to make lines or shapes, there's a little galvanometer that moves so fast that it creates what you see here. But it's actually in a moment in time, it's only a dot that moves really fast, and your brain does the rest. So you can see the software in action, and it was really freezing. It was actually snowing the night of the performance. But with this technique, we could export point clouds and 3D content into SVG, into Flash, and then back into the laser with RS32. But that was a very interesting project. Probably the beginning of something else as well. I want to work more with lasers. I think I've got 4 more minutes, so I'll... by the way, Juliette is laughing at me because I'm late, but the talk was extended a little bit, so I'm not late. I can see the time. So yeah, this is a hologram. This is the invention of Denis Gabor, and holograms were actually invented in 1948. So when people call things hologram these days, it's not holograms. This is a hologram. It's usually green. It's on photographic paper, and it's made with a laser and interference patterns. just saying this because I made this project last year, which is not a hologram, but it's a volumetric projection. It's a projection in mid-air. We can probably find a better way for these aesthetics and technology. But this was part of the things I wanted to experiment for years. And when I got the keys of the new studio, the first thing I did was to bring water and one projector. It was really freezing in these days. And then I did a slightly bigger version. The nice thing with this technique, so I atomize water. So I use water with high pressure and special nozzles that took me 2 years to find. So the water gets vaporized into tiny drops that you can't see. So you don't see anything until you project light, and then the image appears, and then it's a bit magic again. So this new piece is called Brume. It's still in development, and that's for me the sort of holy grail is to be able to play with light in space, but not on a screen, just in mid-air, and work with this sort of volumetric format. This is a slightly different idea, but still with this wish of making 3D projections in mid-air. So this is just R&D. There's no installation touring right now, but hopefully there should be soon, if we can find the time to develop this. So it's actually really precise head tracking and projection onto an invisible screen. And as you move, the perspective moves on the screen, so it feels like it's there in the air, when in fact it is just a real-time anamorphosis. Giving away all my secrets here, but in case you're wondering. So the only problem with this technology is that right now it's a single viewer, so it tracks one user position. So if you have a second person, then the projection looks weird and distorted. So we're sort of looking into different technologies to be able to have more people around and something even more volumetric, I guess. OK, almost the end. So back to my early experiment 11 years ago. And just next to it, I've put my sort of latest experiments with the head tracking and the projection onto this invisible screen. And still now, I still have the same obsession of recreating reality or modifying reality with projected light. So I guess if we let another 10 years go, maybe the third GIF will be even more convincing. With all the new sort of upcoming technologies of VR and tracking and holographic displays, actually, the HoloLens is quite interesting. But I'm going to sort of keep exploring to maybe one day be able to sort of question the nature of reality even more. I've got 48 seconds left, but maybe I'll stop it there. Thank you. And thank you to both Nicolas